We find that the biggest errors in almost all forms of video acquisition come down to camera settings. And this is the biggest thing that we'd like to save you from that sort of pain. We felt it was important enough to mention. So when we talk about camera settings, we want to pick a frame size that's consistent with needs. 1920 by 1080 or 1280 by 720. And we want to make sure all of our cameras have that same setting. More isn't always better. When it comes down to it, there's some thoughts about how to pick the right frame size as well as the right frame rate. Kind of like to think of it like this. When we work at 1080, we're getting this full, gorgeous 1920 by 1080 picture. It's a large picture, and we probably are going to make the decision to work with less pictures at a lower frame rate at 24 frames per second or 25 for PAL. This gives us a real cinematic feel. It's a larger picture, and the frame rate gives us that cinematic feel. We'll have some problems with that. It's this sort of beauty at 1080 that we're getting this nice big picture. You could also choose to go with 720, and a great reason to choose 720 is we know that we're going to want to do two things. We're going to either do a lot of speed changes in post-production, or that we're going to be capturing stuff at high speed, because at 720, it's more common to shoot at 60 frames per second, 50 frames per second in PAL. With this higher frame rate makes it easier to slow down, but also easier to capture action. It's worth mentioning the token standard definition at 480 lines vertically, and it gives you a real feel here in this picture of the size difference. Coming back to frame rates, at 23 frames per second, we often call it 24, it's very filmic. The extra bonus is it lets a lot more light into the camera, meaning you can shoot in lower light. At 25 frames per second, this is PAL, this is very much for Europe. You can use 25 frames. Kind of instead of 24, and it's what was used for broadcast as well as this sort of cinematic feel. The only real reason to use 2997 is if you're going to be going to broadcast with the finished work, or you're going to be mixing it with standard definition materials. It just gives you the best consistent look to have the same frame rate across all your footage. If you're working at 720, you may find that 50 frames per second or 60 for NTSC, these are pretty much the standard. And again, it's great for slowing down the footage or grabbing action because there's just more information, more frames to be able to see that action or that slowdown occur with. You can also shoot with 720 at 24 frames per second or 25 for PAL, with the major advantage being that you're going to save space on your camera. It's still a high-def picture, but since there are less pictures, you're going to be able to jam more footage into that card, and that's a nice bonus if you know you're going to be capturing long interviews. So those are the two kind of things that you need to decide and make sure it's consistent across all your cameras: the frame size and the frame rate.